I'm a physician in my first training. I had my first IT startup in medical technology back in 1979. I was working with some of the world's first desktop PCs to interview patients and to make diagnoses. I was also working with connecting Coulter machines to the Commodore PETs back in 1980. I think we were the first company to do it in the Middle East. So I've been tracking your world and a whole variety of worlds. I lectured to Google one day, Microsoft the next, ExxonMobil and BP, every industry you can imagine. And what I want to do is to look at the world of MedTech from the broader perspective, looking from the outside in. I can't claim to be an expert in any of your areas. You are the world experts in your technologies. You know more about these things than anybody else on this earth. But what my aim is to provoke fresh thinking. And you know, it is often said that the greatest risk inside any organization is institutional blindness. It's when too many merchant bankers have been with too many other merchant bankers, or when too many people from the Pentagon to play too many war games with other people from the Pentagon. We need oxygen, and that's where actually innovation comes from. In fact, I'm really interested in where we get our best ideas from. I've been doing a global survey on this, looking at the answers that 15,000 senior executives, CEOs, and chairmen of large companies have been saying about this issue. I'm interested where you get your best ideas from. I'm not just talking about an idea that later becomes an innovation, but I'm talking about an idea to unblock one of the great challenges that we've been hearing about today, challenges inside your organizations. It might be just an idea to stop the churn of some of your innovators inside an existing team. And put your hands up if you get your best ideas in meetings at work. Put your hands up if you get your best ideas in the shower. Oh, that's really interesting. That's one of the most popular ones globally. That's, put your hands up if it comes in the bath. Never in the shower, but in the bath. Okay, one or two. Put your hands up if it comes at night. So often at night that you have to go to sleep with a piece of paper by your bed and a pen, which you'll write in darkness in case you wake up this person who's sleeping next to you, but nevertheless you write in the night. Put your hands up if you get ideas in the night. You know, what's really interesting about these places where we get these ideas, they all have one thing in common, which is they're unintentional. They're the places we spontaneously invent. It is almost impossible to innovate in an intentional manner, I would argue. I would argue that, in fact, all the greatest innovations in history have been accidental. All the greatest geniuses have had their most genius ideas when they weren't looking for them. Now, what does that tell us about innovation? What it tells us is that many of our processes are defective. We've got teams which are engineered to innovate, and then we wonder why they lack genius, when actually what we need to do is to tell them to go and have a shower at home, and after they've done that, to go and sleep for a very long time. Now, the reason why I'm saying that is because I think there are some aspects of medical tech that apply, where the answers we need are so complicated that they will not come through an engineered thought process. I'll give you an example where I'm expecting breakthrough technologies to happen. It's not in any one of these spheres. You see, in the olden days, life was very simple. We'd say we have a biotech team, or we'd say we have a mobile connectivity team, or we have the world's largest computers also working with nanotech. For me, I tell you this, all the most exciting areas of MedTech that I'm seeing right now are fusions of several different kinds of teams. And the biggest risk I am seeing in MedTech right now is that almost every single MedTech startup I see are one discipline teams. It's a physicist, and maybe you get an engineer, and if you're lucky you get a gene therapist in there as well, and a couple of mathematicians, but there it stops. I'm seeing very narrow specialty bases inside many MedTech companies, even mature, even very large ones, who had a fantastic success with one runaway product, and then they came back in with the same skill set to produce another one, and then another one. And we've been hearing these kinds of stories, but they're quite focused and narrow, and I want to suggest to you that the world is changing too fast for them. You see, stuff happens, and all innovation happens on the outer edge of the radar screen. And I can tell you that most of the largest corporations in the world that I work with are seeing their strategies consistently overtaken by events. And I believe that this same thing is going to happen to a high percentage of the MedTech companies today that are currently successful. Stuff happens. It doesn't matter who you are or what it is that you're looking for. Stuff happens. And all things connect together to all other things in our joined up world. A single event in Japan that lasts 5 minutes is enough to transform the energy policy of Germany for the next 35 years, and the energy policy of Japan too. That in itself will have further knock-ons and consequences for the way our world operates and affects the global economy. A single mutant virus that attacks only 862 people, sorry, only 8,600 people, of which 860 died. I, of course, am talking about SARS. That was enough not only to disrupt the parts of the global economy, not only to ground every single plane in much of Asia, but was also enough to transform the whole of public policy worldwide, which is why we were better placed when swine flu came along. It's affected the whole way we think about threat. And these things, as I say, all connect to just about everything else as well. And while we may say that a presidential election may not affect MedTech too much, I think it may affect it more than we think. The future of Europe will be determined by, well, certainly not by politics, I can tell you. Whether Greece stays in or out of the euro will be driven by the most important word which will drive the future, which is not technology and it's not innovation, it's not politics and it's not economics, it's not even currency rates. And what is this most important word that will drive the future? We've already heard about it today. We can think about technology in all kinds of ways. We can think about technologies that are carried. We can think about technologies which are embedded. We can think about technologies that become totally part of human consciousness. Actually, it's interesting when we think about what we can do by fusing chips with brain tissue. As you know, every neuron is genetically programmed to communicate with computers. We don't need to teach a neuron to grow into the surface of a chip. They do it automatically. They are always searching for electricity, and they grow out until they hear electricity. As soon as they find it, they grow out more neurons and you develop bandwidth. So we have chips growing on the surface we have nerve cells growing on the surface of chips. We've been doing this for the last 10 years. We have rats which are able to communicate virtually with other rats. These are chips with abrasions, with extensions on their surfaces which capture nerve cells which then grow connections to each other in a biodigital surface. But the big question is this: not where will the technology go in rats? The technology is already communicating thoughts from one rat to another. One rat says, "I'm thirsty" in New York, and the other replies in Hong Kong, here is some water. The other rat responds, says "thank you" and pulls a lever. They are communicating, these rats. They are in a joint conscious state. But here's the question. Put your hands up if you would like a chip implanted into your brain. Put your hands up if you are absolutely certain that these things should be kept out of the brains of children in New York. Okay, so what we begin to see is that the future of MedTech, certainly in this regard, is not going to be driven by innovation. The future of MedTech here certainly will be driven by the most important word, which is driving the future, which will drive whether Greece stays in or out. It will drive just about, it's the word which has driven all of human history. It's not the events themselves or the innovations that really matter. It's the emotional reactions to them. The future will be driven by emotion, and health is one of the most emotional things you can possibly imagine. We were talking at lunchtime today about the challenge MedTech has of getting regulators' attention. I want to suggest to you the reason is simple, because it doesn't engage emotionally in many cases as much as, let's say, an orphan drug which someone needs who has a rare kind of leukemia, without which they have an absolute 100% guarantee of being dead within 12 weeks from diagnosis. But with this particular drug, we think, despite its explosive side effects in a minority of people, we think we have a prospect of curing between 10 and 20% of these 8-year-old children. I tell you, that grabs people emotionally. If you're talking about a different kind of lens to implant in someone who has cataract surgery, it might not. And one of the great challenges, therefore, is to create these emotional stories, which is why, Lisa, I was touched by your story, the story which I was thinking, this could be my own wife, it could be my own daughter. Someone who can go straight to a reconstructive surgery that gives her back her body image, and without months of painful surgery and all the disfiguration and body image issues as well. My heart leapt. That kind of thing. I can see, FDA will push it through much faster than a whole range of other technologies. It's telling the story. It's about seeing the world through the eyes of the people we're trying to reach, and most importantly, through their beating heart. And as we do that, we will find a new way to think about MedTech. Let's just think about another area of life. Let's think about Google's world just for a moment. Google and everyone connected with the web knows that you lose 80% of your customers in 10 seconds. Why? 10 seconds is an eternity these days. I want you to just remember that just 10 seconds just for a moment, because it applies to your world too. We've been talking about live diagnosis. Who was it was talking about that just now? The importance of being able to get the live diagnostic result at the speed of light. Why? Because life is too short. 10 seconds is an eternity. Put your hands up if you find it really annoying when you get through to your electricity company and they say, press 1 for accounts, press 2 for customer service. Put your hands up if you find that unbelievably irritating. Put your hands up if you find it so irritating that you think a law should be passed in this state to make it illegal to install such a system so people can be put in prison who designed them, right? Okay? Now, you have just shown me that you are passionate about 10 seconds. You're saying 10 seconds is eternity. 10 seconds is moral evil. 10 seconds is theft, right? And yet the strange thing is that the very people who know these things still put these systems in. So every IT company does it, every utility company does it, every large corporation does it, even though they know it screws up the customer relationship. Why? Because they forgot to think about life through the customer, through the beating heart of the customer, and they got so obsessed with the technological solution. I just say again, the future is not about MedTech, it's about something else. MedTech plus something. Just going back to the Google world, we're living in a world now, of course, where the individual who's Googling knows far more than the physician about their treatment and about the MedTech available. And again, if we're telling the story, we need to be selling direct. I know we've talked a lot about selling to surgeons and the rest, but we are dealing, I suggest, with a group of people who are much less well informed often about the technologies that will be used than they are about the drugs they will be given, and that needs to change. And we're dealing with information overload, which I think is one of the greatest challenges for us in innovation right now. I did a project, I work a lot with pharma companies. I did a project, back in 2003 on stem cell technology. I was given the opportunity to visit anywhere I wanted all over the world. I went to Harvard Medical School and so on. But you know what? I discovered that in the previous 12 months, over 2,300 wonderfully good research papers have been published on stem cell research alone. And that was then, in 2003. Even then, even those early days, when I was traveling around the world and I met a professor of using stem cells, let's say, in the reconstruction of the human eye, or in some other area, I discovered that most of them were entirely ignorant of each other's work. So I walk into there and say, if I shared something, I would only share things which were in the public domain and actually things which I knew this colleague was really proud of and really hoped that Professor John Pedersen would know about as well. And I say, well, actually, are you aware, John? I've just come from Martin's laboratory in Norway. He sends his warm greetings to you. Oh, yes, I know him well. Well, he's just published an extraordinary piece of work, which I'm sure I'd want you to know about. And you can hear clunk, the jaw hit the ground. And I began to realize that if one of the greatest things we need to try to overcome is this institutional flurry. It's a coincidental danger, institutional blindness, but also institutional overload, the inability to put it all together. Look at this. This is Google's view of data in the world. The amount of data that is unconstructed versus structured. What's so fascinating about your research, sir, in terms of what I call a fingerprint of serum. And the genius of it, you don't even need to know what any of those compounds are. It's just mathematics. All you need to do is get that fingerprint, that barcode from that person's serum, and then compare it with the evolution of their medical history over the next 10 to 20 years. And you are sitting on a gold mine. Even better if we understand what some of those markers actually are, and we can relate them to physiological processes, but actually, who cares? You don't need to do that. All you need to do is be able to say, I can tell you, I've seen this serum before. I've seen only 15 cases, and they were all dead in 8 weeks. And I can tell you why they died. Over to you. This is what happens when we actually restructure data. And it is the biggest opportunity that MedTech has ever produced. It's when we structure data and align it to some of the systems, processes, procedures, and things that you're doing. And of course, mobile is transforming all of this, and so is the cloud, because the structuring that data no longer needs to be in the local unit. And talking of mobile and structured data, you know, back in 1980, we were working on computer diagnostics. The aim being to replace the intellect of the physician, because it's so limited. If I've got a stem cell professor who is almost entirely ignorant of 85% of other stem cell research in his own specialty area, heaven help us when it comes to anything else. What it means is that we're in the world of computer diagnostics, a complete rethink about the competence of a physician to diagnose and treat. What it means is that we're entering a new world, a world of cloud-based medicine, where most physicians will find themselves in the future overruled by a computer system. Why? Because, Daniel, you might be the world's, let's suppose, the world's greatest expert on recovery from severe burns, from 95% burns, you know, how to manage this person in such a situation. If it's even humanly possible, you are the person who knows. But actually, 10, 20 years' time, we find a time when even someone as qualified as you might be in that area is now up before the courts because some particular person has died, we have an angry relative, and now we have an attorney attacking you because he's saying, and why didn't you follow the algorithm? And you say, well, I invented the algorithm. You say, yes, I know, but you're not always operating consistently with the algorithm that you created. So yes, but there's clinical judgment here. Yes, but the patient died. And so this becomes an irresistible force, I promise you. We will find that physicians, even though they are convinced the machine is wrong, will find themselves compelled to follow it. Just look at the speed at which this has happened. Just in the last few months, Ottawa Hospital has just ordered 3,000 iPads. The Mayo Clinic, 10,000 iPhones and 2,000 iPads. I promise you these are not so the physician can communicate, but it's to control what they do. It's to make sure that they are aligned, the decision-making processes are consistent and coherent. And part of this, of course, is virtual medicine and connected with the other massive trend, which is to keep people out of hospital. We've talked about into the office, yes, but actually that's not good enough. It's to bring them home. And that's really where medicine is going to be in the future. And if you want to know where the biggest explosion is going to be in terms of the volume of medtech, it's going to be in the home. I'm not saying in terms of turnover, because these devices will be cheap. It's all about trust. Trust in a world where people no longer believe the medtech stories that you tell. In fact, let me prove it to you. If we look at this site here, TripAdvisor, who's used TripAdvisor in the last year? Okay, I want to benchmark your responses against another 50,000 people I've recently polled on this. Okay, here's a hotel in London, which is doing very well or very badly, depending on what you think. You type in the, see, here's the deal. The more the hotel advertises in the Financial Times, the more people just type in the name of the hotel into Google. And the more stories about rats they see. But here's the story. Real story is this. Where do you go first? You see, Google, the first thing you get when you type in the hotel name is a wonderful story about the hotel. The second is the most diabolical story about the same hotel. Rats, scorpions, and the rest. And then on the right-hand side, because the hotel logo can no longer be found on the listings, it has to hit back with a paid listing. Okay, so you've got 3 choices and 1 click. Which do you go for first? Put your hands up if you go for the honeymoon story. Put your hands up if you always go for the rats. Okay. Now put your hands up if you go, you know neither of these are true. You go straight for the official marketing site because you know they tell the truth. And see, what you told me is something that's, joking aside, is actually really serious. if you remember nothing else today, remember this that you've shown me about yourselves. I'm just holding a mirror up to you. What you're telling me about yourselves is actually very typical of 95% of all audiences except Google itself. By the way, who wrote this one? This was the most beautiful hotel in the world. Correct. Actually, they have to be quite subtle about it. It's usually the nephew's girlfriend, because otherwise, they get struck out by TripAdvisor. What about this one? Who wrote this? Competitor. No, of course you knew that. You knew that. You're sophisticated, intelligent, and extremely well-educated people, but you still went for the rats. See, the future's not about logic. The future's not about science. It's certainly not about technology or published papers. The future's about, as you've shown me very well, the future's about emotion. And what you've shown me is that even a sophisticated audience, and I do just the same, even though you knew that they're both a pack of lies, this one is written by the hotel, this one by a competitor, that even so, you would still prefer to believe the lies of a competitor. Perhaps. It's so emotionally compelling. And you certainly wouldn't go near the official website. So what that tells us is that if we're going to tell the story about MedTech, yes, I believe, Lisa, because I know that you're here and I can breathe the same air as you. But actually, if it's your website, it isn't going to tell the story. The only thing that's going to tell the story is the YouTube video of the mother who breaks down in tears as she saw what happened to her daughter who had had her breast removed just like she'd had it because she's got the same gene, and she saw her 22-year-old have a perfectly reconstructed breast within the first 8 weeks. And that kind of story drives power, passion. And it's based on the truth. It has that ring of authenticity. Demographics, powerful driver. You could argue the biggest driver in medicine today. 1 billion children alive today, all of whom will be adults within the next 18 years, all of them in the market for your products. And of course, demographics combined with urbanization makes these processes easier because people are better organized. We have a rising middle class. They are in structured healthcare systems. 40% of the world economy will be in Asia just within the next 3 or 4 years. That's on purchasing power parity terms. But remember, purchasing power parity means that if you use local labor to produce the same product, it fits. It just doesn't work making it in America and selling it to people in Bangladesh. Actually, that's a last century idea. But actually, it's interesting how little MedTech is made in these emerging economies at the moment. One billion children alive today, but there's another billion. 1 billion people will be over the age of 60 in the next decade. And actually, most of those over 60-year-olds will be in Asia quite soon. So a lot of the thoughts we had about, a lot of MedTech companies I know, they're based in the US, they think mainly about the US market, and then they think about selling some in the UK and Europe. Hey, come on. This is the biggest opportunity there's ever been for MedTech if we can get it right, but it won't be the same MedTech. It'll be adapted, be sold differently, packaged differently, simplified. By the way, I said 1 billion over the age of 60, but of course, 75% of over 85-year-olds are women, as you know, and 185% of all 100-year-olds are women because men don't live very long. More seriously than that, 65% of all American wealth is owned by those over the age of 65. And since most of them are women, it means that most of the American wealth is owned by old women. In Italy, by 2026, there will be 1 billion people over the age of 90. Enough to swing every election and to decide every health budget. And most of them will be women. It's a new medical market. Devices for over 90-year-olds, there are 1 million of them coming up. Just in one country alone. Actually, in Germany, you need 4 couples right now, and in Japan, you need 4 couples to produce a single great-grandchild. The trouble is, you see, you either have to make people or you have to import them. There isn't really anything else you can do. And the future is not about sickness. It's not even about wellness. The future is about performance. This is the Viagra age. This is the age that doesn't want to get old. This is the age that thinks the age can be escaped. This is the age of mental Viagra. This is the age when 1 in 5 of all students in America this year will use drugs like Ritalin and other drugs designed for Alzheimer's patients in order to stimulate their brains just before exams. This is the age of performance medicine. This is MedTech for a different purpose altogether. But if we go back to the aging situation, we see, of course, something that you're very familiar with, which is the impact of aging on federal health spending, in this, and of course it influences many of the challenges, many of which are difficult to deal with medical technology alone, like dementia. And when we've already been talking about the issue of rationing and the fact that the decision-making is coming down more locally. It's happening at hospitals here. It's happening at GP level in the UK. This is a trend which is happening incredibly fast. In my country, it's happening for one really big reason, which is the only way politically to enable hospitals to close and health cuts to happen is to get doctors who are as local as possible to make those decisions so they get assassinated instead of you. And that's what's happened. So a friend of mine is in the business of closing a big local hospital in my town. He has hate mail. He's had 5,000 or 6,000 people out on the streets shouting his name. They are determined the hospital should not close. But he is a general practitioner. He's a local family doctor, and the local family doctors in the UK have been given the power over almost the entire health budget of the UK. It's the massive revolution, and a different version of it, I think, is happening here in terms of much more local-based decision-making in hospitals. But in many countries, this is going to happen. And it's all about community and patients and being closer to those that make the decisions and allowing families to have a voice and all that kind of stuff. But it has profound implications for just about every aspect of this competition. And one thing I want to say about MedTech is that the competition is getting complicated. Because in the age of austerity, I mean, I think of my friends in Greece right now. In the age of austerity, we have rationing, not just between a modality of treatment for, say, cancer reconstruction of breast surgery, but we're dealing with quarrels between breast surgeons and cardiovascular surgeons for budget. We're dealing with quarrels between education and health for budget, between health and defense for budget, between prevention of infectious disease in children versus care of the elderly and joint replacement and dementia research. These are huge, hugely important debates which will cloud every decision about MedTech for the next 15 years or more, 20 years, 30 years. Rationing has always been with us, but now it's being formally acknowledged right out because of the austerity issue. And rationing, the rationing is being influenced irrationally, irrational rationing, because, of course, it's emotion which is driving a lot of this. Patient campaigns, what they read on Google. We have legal and IT-related decisions which aren't necessarily in the best interest of patients. We have financial incentives, which we've talked about, whether it's the surgeon jointly financed with the hospital and so on. Many of these things are changing. Patient experience, local skills and experience, whether there's the local infrastructure to take advantage of it, and so on. All these things. Let's just look at prostate. Every single one of us will have one of these things done. If you're a man in this room. It's only a matter of timing. So how are you going to have it done? How would you like it done? Would you like it done with laser or with diathermy, or would you like to take your choice with microwave destruction? It could be less destructive, but not so reliable. You probably have to have it done twice. You can have it done by a Da Vinci robot if you want, and so on. And that's just today. We are dealing with competition choice. And all the time we have left field things which happen which make MedTech completely redundant. TB is a good example. This could have been a friend of mine at school. I had a friend called Shafiq Purani. He walked in calipers because he had TB, he had polio at the age of 5. He was still walking in calipers when he was an early adult. But this is an extinct illness, so they're all out of business. I want to ask you, this is history, you tell me the future. What modalities, what areas of medical need right now do you think could become extinct as a result of left field technology? I'll give you some examples in a moment. Can we stop the ticking of the clock anyway? Could we stop the aging process altogether? Maybe we can. Now look at this. Worn out mitochondria waste energy. Up to 20% of all the energy from the food you eat is burnt in generators, the mitochondria, but the electricity is wasted. It just fizzes across the membrane. You give rats alpha-lipoic acid or acetyl L-carnitine, and suddenly their mitochondria operate at nearly 100% efficiency. You have killed the aging process. You have stopped it. You restored them to maximum efficiency. That has an impact. It has an impact on the way rats run mazes. It has an impact on how they remember. It has an impact on their healing capacity. What about a medicine which does this? What about a medicine which you could take every day for a month and throw it away, which would lower your blood pressure to normal and give you a total body lift at the same time? Imagine walking down the street. You don't know whether a woman is 19 or 90. Actually, it's in clinical trials. Did you know that? The company is called Altion, but don't buy the shares. Why? Because it only works in mice and rats. They get a total body lift. What it does is it restores the elastin in the skin. It dissolves out the carbohydrate, the sugars, which map together elastin fibers as we get older. It dissolves them into the bloodstream where they get eaten up as fuel. As a result, not only the blood vessels start to stretch in the normal way, but so does the skin. Extraordinary. What would happen if we found a way to actually make it work in humans? What happens to blood pressure therapy then? A lot of pharma companies would be quite worried about that. What about monkeys? We are keeping mice and rats alive to the age of 170 in human terms. We're keeping dogs alive to the age of 140. We keep earthworms alive to the age in human terms of 200 years. And now we've started on monkeys. We know the story about restricting calories, but this is different. You can get many of the effects of restricting calories in animals by giving them metformin, which is a drug you use to treat diabetes in old people. If you give it to healthy people, they're fine. They don't get any side effects except a problem with alcohol. We just tell them not to drink alcohol, and they can take a drug for 20 cents a day, which perhaps will give them the same metabolic effect as starving them. It's very interesting. What it does is it clips off the peak of sugar level after you eat a meal. After 20 years, we don't know what the result will be because we haven't been following for longer than 20 years, but after 20 years, in some studies, 80% of the monkeys are alive versus only 50% on normal calories. They have less cancer, less diabetes, less heart disease, less strokes. And then, of course, there's the stem cell story. We know how to repair the brains of mice and rats that have had strokes. We have animals running around their cages after transecting their spinal cords. We know that your brain can repair itself. It does so every day using bone marrow stem cells. How do we know that? Because, put your hands up if you knew that. I'm sure you've heard the story about the man with the woman with the male brain. Woman with leukemia, irradiated, and cured. Cured by a bone marrow transplant from a wonderful, wonderful match from a male donor. When she died, she gave her body to medical research, and they did all kinds of things. And as someone had the wild thought of actually inspecting the cellular structure of her brain. And they discovered her brain was full of XY chromosomes. And male cells had seeded her brain with new viable tissue from her bone marrow, and had clearly been doing so every hour of every day that she had lived. We're not quite sure what the exact function of those brain cells are, whether they contribute to consciousness or whether they're just supportive structures, but we're learning all kinds of things about the regenerative nature of brain tissue, and that's made us think again about the power of stem cells. And then, of course, we start combining them, as we've already heard today, with polymer structures of various kinds, and we start to see other extraordinary possibilities, not just growing tracheas, but all kinds of other organs as well. Fascinating. And what about the non-aging whale? I'm really interested about another invention I'm going to show you, which allows us to read the genetic code of human beings at high speed. We know that there's some kind of whales which don't get old. There's no sign of aging in them whatsoever. You can follow this by looking at the Rockfish Project, which is an American project. I think that some of that team will win Nobel Prizes for aging. Why? Because rockfish divide into two types. Some of them are dead in 20 years, and some live to the age of 100. We have no idea why. The ones that live till they're 200, they die of stuff, like infections and things, but they don't get old. Every one of you has seen a doctor in the last 2 years that if you have, it will have been because of your birth certificate. Almost certainly because of something that is related directly to your age. But not these ones. The whales too, some of these humpback whales live to the age of 200, the rest are dead in 20 years. We know it's a gene trick. It's a gene trick that must be the same probably in the rockfish as in the whale. We are unable to find a single mechanism of physiological aging in these creatures. Soon we will know what those gene differences are, and all genes do are make proteins, and we'll know what the proteins are too, which will enable us perhaps to activate a similar gene inside a human being. By the way, parrots and turtles probably have the same gene, if you think about it. Very interesting. I'll come back to genetics. What about genetic prophecy? Are we ready for it? We're on the edge of an explosion, not just you're talking about a serological prophetic device. This is similar. This is serology fingerprinting. This is genetic fingerprinting. And by the way, we don't even need to know exactly what the genes are or what they